Welcome back to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal, where, by anything but popular demand, I have been allowed to host the show entirely on my own today. Of course, you will not be able to see this beautiful face all on its own for the entire show. Instead, we've got a special guest today. We brought in this morning Mark Finchem, the state representative of Arizona for the 11th District, also running for State Secretary of State here in Arizona. A prominent figure throughout the 2020, or the aftermath of the 2020 election, where he was at the forefront of efforts to force an audit in the state of Arizona regarding election integrity. So we're going to get to that part of the episode quickly. If you like these episodes where we present some exclusive interviews here at Western Journal and WJ Live, make sure you leave it in the comments on YouTube while we're live. While you're there, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, make sure you're notified when we go live. You'll be able to hit that bell after you hit that subscribe button. Never miss an episode of WJ Live, where we're back Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific and 5 p.m. Eastern. Without further ado, we will be moving on to that interview with Mark Finchem. Thank you so much for your time. Why run for Secretary of State?
Because I think we can do better. I mean, the Secretary of State that we currently have is on record, even though she says, well, that was my personal Twitter account, is on record as saying that Trump supporters are neo-Nazis or Nazis. Okay, I find that incredibly offensive from somebody who's supposed to be an unbiased arbiter, an unbiased leader for the Secretary of State. The other thing that she made noise about was that she believes her role is to see to it that as many Democrats as possible are placed into office. Okay, that's not my view of what a Secretary of State should be leading towards. It should be, in my view, fraud-free elections, free and fair elections. And interestingly enough, I've gotten some support from some Democrats who they have exactly the same idea. John Brakey, for example, out of Tucson. John has been suing the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, I think, for almost a decade over their management or mismanagement, if you will, of elections. And he's a wealth of knowledge, and I'm fortunate to have been working with him. He has supplied all kinds of documentation that is meaningful, that helps us look into where are the potential places where we might find misbehavior on the part of nefarious actors who would prefer to have a predetermined outcome instead of one that is literally the voice of the people.
Excellent. And so if you were to take the office that is now Katie Hobbs' office, 2022, you come in 2023, what's the first kind of process thing or even just thing in that office that you would see changed with regard to our elections and with regard to that office?
Well, I think there's a number of things. One of those is a program that would introduce ballot fraud countermeasures. Several weeks ago, I led a group of legislators from both the House and Senate where we had a ballot from Cochise County, had a company by the name of Authentics put some fraud countermeasures into it, and we're talking about UV light, holograms, and all that. And they were wowed. It highlighted the fact that anybody could print a ballot and insert that into the system without the recorders or the elections officials really knowing it. So what this does is it creates a chain of custody that we currently don't have. We would know with certainty every single ballot because the paper itself would be serialized. It has built into it some pretty nifty fraud countermeasures that you see with black light. So you would know whether or not somebody had created a group of ballots and inserted them into the system that were not legitimate. There are a number of allegations that happened. We won't know until the Senate has finished its audit work. They're undergoing a forensic audit. We expect the work product of that audit to be available within about 60 days. I think that's what President Karen Fann has said out of the Senate. But one of the things we need to get a handle on and get our minds wrapped around is, are our elections as secure as the people who have an interest in the outcome say they are? You know, Stalin once said, I don't really care who votes. I just care who counts the votes. So I'm concerned that that is a hole that we have. I think that's a big piece of how we might address that. And according to Authentics, we're looking at about 20 to 25 cents per ballot. And every time I brought this question up to voters, taxpayers in a room, ask them, do you want to spend 20 cents on securing your election? They look at me like I've lost my mind. Absolutely we do.
With everything else they're spending the money on.
Exactly. And then I think some of the other things that we want to take a look at are, we've got, for example, it takes 3 weeks when a lobbyist registers in the system with who they are representing. It takes 3 weeks for that to be visible to people. Okay, that tells me that their infrastructure, the Secretary of State's office infrastructure, computer infrastructure, is so aged that it's broken down. It's not working. I mean, in this day with the technology that we have, that should be instantaneous recognition. If, Bob Smith is going to represent a particular client, the minute they push send, that should be available for everybody to see. You want transparency in government? There's a place where we can do much better.
Excellent. Well, so those are big plans. I know you've been on the show before. For audiences to our show that haven't seen you before, and even, quite frankly, for national audiences who are looking at Arizona, it was a key state in the last election, it generally is, who would like to know you a little bit better, just talk a little bit about your background for us.
21 years of public safety officer, which is fire, police, EMS in Kalamazoo, Michigan. That was from 1978 to 1999. I've had a great retirement. Since that time, I've worked in both small business and large, both here in the United States and sent abroad for one of my employers to India. So I've got experience in a lot of different areas. Farming and ranching is in my background, so I've got a broad base of understanding of what constituents experience, what they go through, what their hopes and dreams are. That's one of the reasons that I decided to run for office back in 2014, the first time I ran for the House of Representatives. And interestingly enough, one of the things that I ran on is I observe term limits, and I don't care if I get reelected, because you're electing me, you're hiring me to do a job. And if I don't do that job, you're going to throw me out of office. And I'm good with that. So the fact that I've been reelected 4 times must be I'm over the target doing something right. Now, there's a recall down in LD11, which has been put up by some folks in Tempe. They claim to be out of Pinell County. At the end of the day, the House and Senate Democrats in our state legislature first lied to the DOJ, then they lied to the FBI by sending a letter to them claiming that I had somehow planned, orchestrated, led the insurrection. They call it an insurrection, the riot at the Capitol, when in fact none of that is true. And they knew it was not true. Yet, for base political motive, they decided to do that. Well, this recall is now based upon all of that fallacious misrepresentation to the DOJ and the FBI. And frankly, that's one of the reasons that we have begun the process of suing every single member of the Democrat caucus in the state, at the state level, because they all signed on to this letter knowing full well that it wasn't true. So as far as the recall goes, a lot of my constituents have told the folks who are leading this when they approach them in parking lots and knock on their door, you need to step away. I voted for this man for a reason. He's not willing to compromise himself. And what you've done, you've actually promoted a lie that was told for base political gain.
And so with regard to kind of more positive aspects that we'd like voters to be looking at going forward, I mean, for the voters statewide who have not voted for you in the past because, districts, and for the national audience that's getting to know you, I mean, what legislative successes and legislative angles would you like to kind of be known for? What work that you've done in those 6 years now would you like to be known for?
I've got a long history of standing up for public lands, for protecting public lands, protecting our state sovereignty. The fact that the federal government continually is eroding away Arizona's tax base by land that is going from private sector to the federal possession, I've fought for payment in lieu of taxes, so that PILT was originally designed to pay Arizona the tax base that we would have had, because the federal government under FLPMA, it's an acronym for a Federal Land Policy Management Act, they decided that they weren't going to liquidate land in Arizona and put it into private hands, but instead we'll pay you what you would have coming in property tax. Well, as with all good federal programs, that's exactly what they have not done. So between PILT, and by the way, people want to talk about, well, we should be able to afford better roads, better schools, better this, better. Yeah, we should be. But the federal government has seen to it that, and Congress, quite frankly, has seen to it that we don't have the tax base in order to afford that. Instead, the left wants to constantly go after people's property tax, increase that. They want to go after income tax. They want to increase that, instead of allowing our government to be restrained to the point that we can afford it. Now, if the federal government decides to come across with PILT, it's actually pennies in lieu of trillions, but be that as it may, if they decide to actually pay us what they agreed to pay us back when this bill the bill turned into law, then we have a different situation on our hands. The question becomes, is the land inside of Arizona, is it Arizona land, or are we simply a territory? In the 1787 debates, September 5th, I believe, with Elbridge Gerry, they were talking about whether or not the land should be in the hands of the federal government for arsenals, forts, magazines, dockyards, all the needful military items. And Elbridge Gerry said, well, if we reach a point where the federal government owns land in a state and owns too much land, could they not awe that state into submission to be nothing more than a large federal enclave? Quite frankly, I think the people of Arizona prefer to have local government as opposed to a concrete jungle government, which, by the way, right now has a big fence around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And something that at the Western Journal we've been particularly interested in is after, I believe it was in light of the election, you and a couple of colleagues introduced HB 2180 here in the state of Arizona with regard to kind of getting a handle on Facebook and Twitter with their censorship policies, essentially arguing that, if these folks are going to be censoring their users, they might as well be a publisher rather than a platform for those folks if they're going to be making those decisions. Can you just talk about where that bill has gone and kind of what the deal is with it now?
Yeah, that's a great segue from what my legislative history is. Legislatively, I have always tried to recognize the civil rights that are inculcated into our Constitution. One of those is your First Amendment right to free speech. And General Jerry Boykin said something a number of years ago at Watchman on the Wall that has just always stuck with me. They don't necessarily want to control your speech. They want to control your thought, because speech is the output of thought. So you think about George Orwell, 1984. I don't need to say any more on that. So House Bill 2180 essentially would have defined in Arizona law the difference between a platform and a publisher. It's very clear. A publisher will go into material that is posted online and edit it, remove it, prohibit its viewing. There's a lot of things that go with the publisher world. At the same time, under Section 230 of the Federal Code, a platform doesn't do those things. So what I attempted to do in this bill, and it was assigned to judiciary but has not been heard, probably won't be heard, is define the difference in Arizona law between publisher and platform. And if you are going to be a publisher, then you have to pay a fee. If you're going to be a platform, it's free. Now, of course, there's certain safeguards. You can't advocate violence against the people group. You can't. It's the old argument of you can't yell fire in a movie theater. So those kinds of things would still be restricted. But at the end of the day, this would create an architecture in Arizona that people would have free speech. Now, I just got off a call this morning with David Barton. I'm sure you recognize that name. And a number of legislators from around the country talking about what is actually in Section 230 of federal law. And there, under, I believe it's paragraph 3, there is a specific carve-out for states to regulate these actions. What this bill would have done is regulate those actions, and it's an interesting approach. What we want to do is foster as much freedom as we can. Well, there's freedom of choice for a platform that wants to be a publisher. If you're going to be a platform, we're not going to charge you the fee. The incentive is be a platform. But if you're going to be a publisher, then you are going to pay a fee. So we're trying to incent the right behaviors for these big tech oligarchs who seem to have this propensity to try to eliminate people's speech when they think it's inappropriate, when they think it's uncomfortable. When somebody behind a desk in Silicon Valley says, I disagree with them politically, I'm going to silence them. Boing. And that's exactly what they do. That's what we've seen across the board. Anybody who has an alternative view to Stalinism, they get silenced, essentially erased in the public square. That's not what this country was founded on. And I'm pretty sure that if somebody were to do that to them, they would be just as angry.
Yeah, and now kind of at the heartbeat of the conservative movement right now, even the kind of the liberty movement, everyone kind of right of center is talking about with what's been going on, even past Facebook and Twitter, just kind of the corporations. We saw over the weekend the MLB moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta because of legislation that was passed there by Republicans to make the elections more free and more fair, right? And so we're seeing that these corporations are absolutely getting at the heart of speech, and they're trying to manipulate these things. Something I'm curious to ask you is, do you think that essentially at this point are the corporations more dangerous to the First Amendment and to kind of the rights of the citizens with how big they've gotten than the government is?
I think that that's exactly right. In fact, I saw a meme this morning, something about if I could ask COVID-19 whether or not masks were necessary, I would, because I can no longer trust my government. Which, okay, kind of an odd way to put it. But yeah, I think that corporations that want to throw their weight around and try and use financial muscle to threaten states, I'm of the opinion that if the states hang together and say, look, that's not going to fly with us, find another place. And it's my understanding that Governor Kemp, good on him, basically said, goodbye. If that's the way you're going to play, have a nice day. Mm-hmm. I would hope that every governor in the state of or in the United States would have the same response. What my concern is that these multinational companies, corporations, they now appear to be doing the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party because that's the big gorilla in the room. We know that Coca-Cola is widely available in China, and if China says we're going to shut you out of this market if you don't, get your people in line, okay, that's antithetical to being an American. If you don't like what I have to say, let's debate that in the public square. And if you want to try to come at me with shaming, that's not going to work. If you want to try and come at me with lies, I mean, take a look at what the House and Senate Democrats have done. You create a fallacious straw man, and then you look at that and point to it and say, that guy's bad while you're burning it down. That's all fake. It's all fake news. And I think that what's interesting about this is when companies like Coca-Cola and MLB, when these large corporations do that, the people in the United States know what they're doing, and they find it offensive. So the message I would give to these corporations, you might want to just back off. If you want to have your free speech place, put it on your website. All of these companies have big websites, and if they want to put their view of the world out there, knock yourselves out. But when it comes to threatening a state that we're going to withdraw our business from you because we don't like your political stand, that means you have now garnered way too much power. You are a threat to our freedom. You are a threat to our civil rights. And any legislator, Republican or Democrat, who allows that to go on really needs to be thrown out of office.
Now, circling back, kind of to close us out, back around to that Secretary of State race here in Arizona, to 2022, are you worried, essentially, with the election fraud conversation that's happened in the last several months? Are you worried in a state like Arizona that it has changed the perception of the voters toward the election more generally? Are you worried that your response to the election fraud personally has changed perceptions of you in this coming election?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Am I worried? Worried's kind of a strong word. I'm concerned that people will subscribe to the view of Will Rogers, who once said, if elections really meant anything, they wouldn't let you have them. I don't want people to subscribe to that idea, because the moment you do and you don't show up at the polls, you allow somebody else's vote to speak for you because you've been silent. Now, it's one thing to be silenced on social media. If we manage elections correctly, properly, we will see every legal vote counted. And I believe that we've got the platform now to bring that forward. I've been suspicious of electronic tabulating equipment for a very long time. And now the question is going around, and I think it's a good question to ask. I don't know that I necessarily subscribe to the thesis, but let's just presume for a moment that this has been at work for a long time, ever since that equipment was brought into the halls of elections. I mean, we look at the judge in Antrim County who opened a sealed audit document and concluded on the record that the voting software, the voting equipment in that state, in that particular election, was designed to commit fraud. All right, that's kind of scary, especially when you think about the economics of things. How much less expensive would it be to hire people to do a hand count of ballots? Now, of course, the county recorders are going to go berserk over this because, oh my gosh, it's going to be so expensive. Really? Prove it to me. Because you're paying a lot of money to these technology companies for what? For something that could be done by hand, tabulated by hand, inspected by hand, and then added up on an Excel spreadsheet. Or, heaven forbid, we'd have a chalkboard where everybody could see where the precinct numbers come in, and then you report what that number is, and you lock it down. Now, one of the things that equipment has done for us is given us the opportunity to preserve the images of the ballots. That I'm not terribly opposed to, because I think what it does is it preserves the record of the election electronically. I think that that's a great safeguard. But I'm very concerned that people will take the idea that it's just not worth the hassle, because what does my vote mean anyhow? And I'm here to tell you that if I'm elected Secretary of State, we will promote the idea of fraud-free elections, fair elections, where every legal vote counts. You know, the left likes to talk about voter suppression. Well, what they never want to talk about is voter nullification. That is the nullification of a legitimate vote by one that is fraudulent. And I think that is what this audit needs to get to. We need to know, did that happen? And if we have some number of votes that were nullified, I'd like to know how were they nullified, so that we can make public policy, so that we can institute legislation that will essentially block the pathway for that to happen in the future.
Well, that's all I had for you today. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Finchem. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Hey guys, huge story. We need a fresh card. Let's red label it. Roll as fast as we can.
All right, on it. Sounds good. All right, guys, we got a red label breaking story. Can we get a picture for that? And can we try to get that out in the next 20 minutes? I want eyes on it as soon as possible.
On it, Joe. 2 more minutes and we'll be live.
Sam, we're going to need a slot for that story, so figure out what you want to bump. Ashley, we're going to want it translated into Spanish yesterday.
Sí, señor. We can slide it in at 2:30. It should be going out here in about 10 minutes.